So first of all, for those of you who are only joining us today for the first time, or not with us last week, my name is Peter Geffen. I'm the president and founder of Kivunim. I'm delighted to welcome you to this third session of our summer explorations, which will continue really through the end of August. We have a new program that we'll actually advertise in a couple of weeks for the end of the summer. Today is very special in general, and really very special for me to introduce to you the Honorable André Azoulay, who in his capacity as a senior advisor to King Mohammed VI of Morocco and to his father, King Hassan II, has really played a remarkable role in many things that take place around us that we're not even aware of. And some of that he's going to share with us today. And but what I want to stress to you in introducing him is that over these years that Andre and I have known each other, and he's heard me say this before, but it bears repeating, the most stellar quality of this man that I've witnessed over the years is his authentic and honest respect for young people. It's not something that you see often, if at all, with public figures, with people who become quite well known and famous. They often forget the years of their own youth, and when they come into contact with young people, if at best they even do come into contact, it is in a way which you can always feel has a patronizing quality. Not with André Azoulay. He has embedded in his heart and soul a regard and respect for young people that I've had the privilege of witnessing in encounters that we've had together year after year over the past decade. And it's really stunning. Now, in addition to that human quality, he is a person who has been involved as diplomat and as counselor and advisor to so many projects around the world. We would spend the hour naming them all. But the quality of all of them that is most characteristic is his deep, abiding, internally motivated commitment to peace, to coexistence, to mutual respect, to a regard for the other, whoever the other is, in absolute, extraordinary, humanistic, and I would say deeply spiritual terms. There are very few people like Andre that you will encounter in this international world, which is why it was so important that he agreed to be with us this week. We've been working to bring the story of Morocco to a larger and larger audience, but I never would have imagined that we would have come to the situation in the United States where we were here so desperate for the wisdom, the experience, the perspective, the commitment that Morocco represents in the task on the international scene to find ways to make it possible for people who are different from each other to live with each other in respect and truthful coexistence in what the Moroccans call Convivencia, without being at each other's throats, without a sense of only seeing the other as a competitor for my place. And my hope is that this week, in both hearing Andre's talk today and in speaking with younger members of the Moroccan generation on Thursday, El Mehdi Boudra and Laziza Dalil, who are on our call today, in this week, we will open up in the imaginations of our American audience the awareness and possibility of what might be if we began to just look at each other in a different way. Hence, the title of our session today, The Moroccan Exception. And our task, I would say, even before we start, is that everybody who attends today and those who will watch this in recording in the days and weeks to come, you take it upon yourself as a mission to make this story more and more well known. We've put up materials on our website for you to read that are really extraordinary, some footage for you to see. And I hope that you will take this really to heart. It's not just a passing lecture today with just another name. André Azoulay represents in himself and in his country something extraordinary and that we need to hear. André, take it away, and thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm so moved listening to you. As usual, you are so generous with me. But I have to confess that every time I'm listening to you speaking about Morocco, mentioning Moroccan exception and naming it as it is, as we see it, as we live with it, and also speaking about my position and what I'm trying to achieve for such a long time. And as you know, my life challenge was for more than 60 years to try to accept and deal with complexity, with diversity, but above all with pedagogy, and give a chance to my children, grandchildren, and as you said before, listening to the new generation, the generation coming, how Morocco decided to put in his agenda, but more than that, as a priority to keep alive its diversity, but more specifically to make Morocco as a flagship country for everything related to Judaism and Islam. And I'm so happy that after such a long travel, it's now a reality, and it's more and more. And I have to add that, to repeat, because I mean, it was largely a result of your commitment, Peter, of Kivunim agenda initiatives. And you remember, I mean, you said that we have been together for decades, trying just to explain and giving a chance to everyone around us to know and to try to deal with this non-usual way to speak from the Arab world, from Islam, for me as a Moroccan Jewish person, but above all as a free person with a free speech. What I'm saying is not a posture. It's not something I have to say by protocol, because being the advisor of His Majesty, it could be understood like a kind of speech for, professional speech. Not at all. I have this chance to be the advisor of the King, Mohammed VI, and to be in a position just to do what I have chosen to do for such a long time. It is this kind of, miracle, capillarity or coherence with what I thought, what is my personal engagement, commitment, and also having the privilege to serve my king, to serve my people, to serve my country, just to explain how it is today in our daily life in Morocco, something which is part of the usual daily life of millions of Moroccan, and it's a chance. But if I may, Peter, let me first start by paying an homage to the late John Lewis. I know now, I mean, I didn't know it before we met, what was his special position, relation, story between yourself as a person, Rabbi Heschel, and also Kivunim with the late Martin Luther King. And I was so impressed from the very beginning by what you explained to me. And I was also following what all, the courage, the loyalty, and the commitment of John Lewis, and I was so proud listening to him and knowing what he tried to achieve all along his life. So I just want to express to you my condolences and my sympathy and my gratitude for giving me a chance to know more about this period, and also to ask you, please, if you can convey to his family my solidarity, my gratitude, and the fact that in my country, Morocco, his passing was also sad news for many of us.
Wow. Thank you very much, Andre. And I will do that, absolutely. Maybe you could start by telling us sort of biographically who you are and what your story has been, so that we have a context in which to understand the work that you've been doing over the last decades with the King.
I'm sorry, you will probably listen to things that I have said so many times to you. But, well, let me start by, again, saying that I'm more than 3,000 years old as a Jewish person in Morocco. Judaism emerged in Morocco close to 700 years before GC. And I belong to a Moroccan Jewish civilization, deeply rooted in the mindset of my fellow Muslim compatriots, and deeply rooted also in the history of my country. So I'm not a newcomer, and it's not a usual story. That's why I'm so pleased that you gave me this opportunity to share it with you. The Moroccan Judaism is part of the Moroccan civilization, the Moroccan nation, the Moroccan people. And as you probably know, when we amended our constitution in July 2011, it was written in the preamble of the constitution that Morocco by today, as a proud Arab, Berber, and Muslim country, was first, long time ago, nursed and forged by many civilizations. First, the Berber civilization. Secondly, the chronology by the Jewish civilization. 100 years later, by the great Arabo-Muslim civilization. We are also African. We are probably somewhere Europeans with the Andalus civilization. And in Morocco, we don't want to put aside any of those civilizations who have been, the components of what is my country today. We are in a period and in a time where people want to split their own history. They want to divide. They want to select. In the contrary, it is in Morocco, we want to add and to make converging all those civilizations. That's why, it's a different story in the world community of nations. We don't want to forget. We resist to amnesia. We resist to any temptation to, to be one thought, one way, one story. No, in the contrary, we have put diversity on the top of our human, political, social, historical, cultural agenda. So it was my feeling, from the very first day of my not only my career, but I started in my life to be an activist. I will never forget the fact that I have my first demonstration in the streets during the French Mandate in Morocco, calling for the Moroccan independence. I was maybe 12 or 13 years old, but at the very beginning, I reacted exactly like millions of my fellow Muslim compatriots, fighting for freedom, fighting for dignity, fighting for justice. No one teach me to do it or ask me to do it. It was something which was just natural to do. And I started to understand my Moroccan DNA and the depths of it and the legitimacy of it very, very early. And I will never forget also that the first day of the independence of my country, there were no Moroccan army at that time, no Moroccan flag. I was just like my young companion in my hometown, Essaouira. We decided to make a kind of parade in the streets because there was no army, there was no organization, and I was ahead of the demonstration, which a Moroccan flag, the same than today, but we made it at home. And I found the photo later on, and I understood also how symbolic, how meaningful, and how visionary was this time and this period for myself. So it never stopped. It never stopped, and all along my now very, very old career, all along those decades, when I was in Paris as a banker for 25 years, or when I came back to Morocco as an advisor of His Majesty, Morocco was always the engine in my mind. I was always an activist, at home or abroad, to try to explain why it was important to try to tell my friends or my families or my family or the social circles around me, to tell them the Moroccan story. Because we, when you remember the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, being Jewish or Muslim was not always something, business as usual. We were confronted to so many challenges, so many dangers to be confronted, to be opposed to each other, and just to make the Moroccan story or history as the larger history of relation between Muslim and Jews.
Andre, could I just ask you, when you were this young activist,
yes,
and you were marching with that flag that day,
yeah,
was the Jewish identity a piece of it or not a piece of it? Like, where did that play at the time?
Yeah, it was definitely a piece of it. I was a scout at that time, a Jewish scout, and there were also the Muslim scouts and Christian scouts. And it happens that we, the Jews, took over naturally, normally. And my Muslim friends, Moroccan Muslim friends, came to us saying, "Go ahead, we need you, we want you." I said, "I need you, I want you also." And it was something which was it was not a construction. It was not something we fabricated. It was just the way we were feeling it, and being, you know, with this kind of attitude, first day of freedom, of independence, we have to do something together, being together, showing together that we finally retook over of our dignity and of our national independence.
But you do understand how odd that sounds to all of us, right? In other words, you're describing a young Jew, a young Moroccan Jew, being a political activist with his Muslim and, in Essaouira's case, Christian friends, leading the celebration of the independence of Morocco from the French.
Yeah.
It seems so.
But Peter, may I interrupt you? You know, it was, I fully understand. I mean, that you are questioning. I mean, you are, okay, it's not something which is obvious. But let me maybe share with you another, maybe an anecdote, but more than that. I was 8 years old, and I was in the office of my father. My father was a civil servant during the French Mandate in the port of Essaouira, but he was fired by the French protectorate because he was Jew. And he was not able, like many Moroccan Jews, to do anything else than just being business, I mean, a commerçant. And I was in his office. I was 8 years old, one evening at the sunset, and one of our family friends, Muslim, Haj Liman, came to him just to say hello. And I will never forget that hour. He was coming back from his pilgrimage in Jerusalem at that time. And at that time, Jerusalem was under the Jordan Mandate. And the Jews were not able to visit Jerusalem by the Jordans. So this person, this Hajj, came to my father saying, well, I just came back from Al-Quds, from Jerusalem, and he took a small bag in his pocket, from his pocket, and he gave it to my father. He said, my friend, I'm sorry that you are not able to go to Jerusalem because it's a sacred place for you, but I was able to do it for myself. And I took this small bag of the from the ground, I mean, un morceau de terre, l'aziza, comment vous dites? Yeah. Yeah. And I took it for you to share my pilgrimage, to share and to give you the chance just to touch it, because it was also a sacred land for you, a sacred land for the two of us. Could you imagine something like that? It's I was, as I said, just 8 years, but I never, ever forgot this image. And I'm always quoting it and saying it because it's part of my legacy. It's part of my history. And it's something like, I see it like a wake-up call for everyone listening to know that it do exist, and it expresses this normal, natural, not fabricated relation, proximity, intimacy between Jews and Muslims in my country. And so it is something which, as I said, it's very deeply rooted in my mindset.
So how are you as a Jew received in the, inside the Arab world? I mean, you must be involved in diplomacy with a local relationship, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and beyond.
Yeah.
Everybody must know André Azoulay is a Jew. How are you received in that universe?
Well, it was not easy, and it was not always a happy story. I was attacked. I mean, people all around didn't really know about the Moroccan history, the Moroccan difference. But even in Morocco, many people disagree, didn't support. I mean, in fact, the largest number of my Muslim compatriots do agree, and were very proud that when the King Hassan II proposed to me to be his advisor, I mean, they see it as a very, very strong and very positive, very good signal of the Moroccan ability, capacity, eligibility to send this kind of message to the rest of the Arab world, but also to the world, saying that a Jewish person could be the advisor of the commander of the Islamic faith. Due to all what we know regarding the situation in the Middle East, in many countries, I remember especially the Ba'ath Party in Syria or in Iraq, attacking me very, very strongly and in a long rhetoric for years. Saying, I mean, there is something which really, I'm sorry. I mean, they didn't understand how it was possible, and they attacked Morocco, and they attacked me personally. But I mean, I have to tell you that now, after 30 years in this position, it's a total different landscape everywhere. There are still some attacks. You know, people or countries who are not able to do the same are very frustrated not to have this ability or this capacity or this vision or this courage to send this kind of signal. And I have watched so many TV programs in some, I mean, were very nasty. But I was, from the very beginning, resilient. And I knew that it will not be easy, but I never give up. And finally, I think that by today, I mean, this Moroccan example is not only accepted and well perceived, but other countries are trying to decline the same model. And I'm very happy, especially when I see the evolution of this situation on that item, on that level, in the Arab Gulf countries, in so many Arab Gulf countries, but also in other countries. I have seen some good signals in Iraq. I have seen some good signals in Egypt, also in Tunisia and other countries. It's a long way, but I'm sure that now, I mean, we are in a situation of non-return to what we have known and what we have experienced 40, 30 years ago. But it's not free lunch, my dear Peter. Being in this position myself, and you remember I have always said to you and to your alumni or your friends, that I'm proud to belong to a very snobbish and selective club, because I am, and I was for a long time, the only member of my club. But today, it's a different situation. I feel more, I feel in peace, and I don't have to raise this flag, because it's accepted, and those who disagree are not as comfortable as they were years before to say, well, Azoulay is probably Mossad, or those who are on the other side said, Azoulay is probably PLO, or I don't know what. That's why, I mean, finally, this kind of attacks, they helped me, because I was not Mossad, I was not PLO, I was something different, and they were wrong. And because they were wrong, they made my life easier, because I don't have to demonstrate or to explain. It's obvious.
But it seems so difficult for us to imagine how somebody could be a Jewish diplomat from an Arab country in the situation in which we have, and we've been living with for 70 years, with such tension between Israel, the Jewish state, and the whole Arab world. How do you manage to negotiate that dichotomy?
Well, first of all, I didn't have to negotiate anything, because before being appointed or called by His Majesty, I was started in Paris in the early 70s. I was a peace fighter. I was a peace activist for peace. I said that identifying myself as an Arab Jew or as a Moroccan, because we have to make the difference. Arab is not a religion. Being Arab is not a religion. It's not just a geography. It's more than that. Nobody is astonished or is shocked when an Italian said he's a European. It's exactly the same. As a Moroccan, I belong to the Arab world with its diversity. As a Moroccan, I am an Arab, I am a Berber, if I may say, I'm an Andalusian, I am an African. But it's culture, it's, civilization. It's not a religion or just a passport card or an ID card, it's something more complex. But coming back to the Middle East, I started to fight for the two-state solution in the late 60s and the early 70s. I remember having met Abu Mazen, who is now the Palestinian president, in 1974. And also, I have the privilege to remember that he said to me in 1974 that his ultimate goal was to give a chance to the two-state solution. 74, Peter, okay? And I'm still alive. I can testify. I can share with all those who want to listen to it that at that time, he was telling me there is no alternative to two-state solution. I met him in Spain, and we met many times later. I met Chairman Arafat also at that time. We were not in having the same vision, the same understanding of the solution, but I decided to listen to them. I always make the double narrative situation as the ultimate and the way to try to understand and to help this issue. And I have always also identified myself to an understanding of the situation in the Middle East or in my contribution to try to give a chance to peace, to tell to my Israeli friends that fighting for the two-state solution was the only way for me to make them more secure, to give a chance to their children to live in peace, to save lives, and to keep alive. What does it mean to be Jewish? I was taught to be Jewish by my rabbis in Essaouira or by my teachers at my school. That, I mean, it is in the 10 Commandments, but it is for me my first commandment. Being Jewish myself was for the very beginning, meaning for me to give to the person I have in front of me or in my mind the same capacity to enjoy the same justice in myself, the same freedom, the same dignity, and the same way of being a human person. And it was from the very beginning. And I remember in my small words for my bar mitzvah that I was saying this kind of, I mean, it was maybe probably less articulated than what I'm saying today, but I always remember that I was not mentioning Palestine or Israel or anything, but I was always saying that I had to respect, to listen, and to accept the one I have in front of me, especially if he was not Jewish like myself. So, and I want to keep this Judaism alive. And it was one of my probably key motivation or prior motivation or central motivation when I started to fight or to help, the solution, the perspective of two-state living side by side, Israel and Palestine. It was my way to support and to help Israel, but it was maybe selfish, but it was my understanding and my choice to keep alive this Judaism, my Judaism, the way it was taught to be Jew. I'm not Jewish by the blood I have in my. It was not my blood. It was what I tried to keep in my mind, to keep alive in my mind.
Do you think that we're at a point where the Moroccan experience, the capacity of an Arab Muslim country with the other identities, as you pointed out, that are in the constitution, but nonetheless a country that the world would identify as being a Muslim country. Are we at a point where the model and the experience could become a model not just for Jews and Arabs or for the Middle East, but for the broader world to recognize?
I have no doubt, dear Peter. I think that this Moroccan reality will be spread all around, but we have to be clear. Until the Palestinian issue is not justly, correctly solved or addressed, we will be fragile, we will be vulnerable. This model will be fragile. This model will be vulnerable. And I think that we cannot be just watching what is going on in the Middle East, especially in Israel and in Palestine. If we are just sitting in our chairs and looking on it, no, we cannot. We have to do all what we can to keep alive this peace spirit, this peace culture. I have also the privilege to have been associated to the Oslo process from the very beginning, as in other many peace processes in the Middle East. And I have, if you allow me to do it again, I remember the day, His Majesty the late King Hassan II, 5 years before he proposed to me to be his advisor, one of his advisors. He proposed to me to be the CEO of one of the largest banks in Morocco. I was in Paris at that time. It was in '86. And he was enough generous to accept that I said, no, thank you, Your Majesty, but I'm not, it's not maybe, I'm not ready. But when it was proposed to me years later to be his advisor, I said yes, because I mean, it was a very, very honorable and very important proposal. Really, I felt from the very beginning very privileged, but it was above all, my decision was based on all the peace processes we were in the early 90s, 90, 91, organized to give more consistency, more substance, more credibility, and more chances to be implemented to so many peace processes in the Middle East. And it was key. It was at that time when it was proposed to me to be the advisor of His Majesty, the Madrid conference. And they said, I have this time to do it and to move forward and to go ahead. Because in Israel, but also in the Arab world, in Palestine also, they will see that it is possible for a Jewish person caring for the safety, the security, and the perennity of the state of Israel and of the two-state solution to be the advisor of one of the leading head of state in the Arab world, Morocco. At that time, the King Hassan II at the time. So it was always my personal commitment, my personal engagement. It never changed from the 60s till today. I will never give up until the last day of my life to try to, again, make it true and to see the Palestinian flag beside the Israeli flag and to see the Israeli children of tomorrow to grow in peace. And the same for the new generation, the Palestinian children, to have a chance to enjoy a different life than their parents and to retake over of their dignity, of their freedom, of their justice. It was my way to be Jewish.
Wow.
And it was close to 30 years before I was appointed by His Majesty as his advisor. I hope that he didn't call on me because I was, and I am Jewish. I think that I know that he was following my career in Paris, and he knew from the long time that it could be helpful for my country. And I was committed to this peace challenge for Israel and Palestine, not because of the fact that I was the advisor of the king. I started at the age of, less than 20 years to try to make it possible.
Did you ever spend personally, I thought I once heard you tell some story about your own personal experience in Israel when you were much younger. Was that my understanding?
I'm not happy with this part of my, I'm not proud. No, I mean, I was always, feeling humiliated and not really well. It was very uncomfortable for me, especially during the 60s and the 70s, to see this cultural and human and social alienation of the Moroccan Jews who emigrated to Israel. I will not forget that in the 60s, until the middle of the 70s, many Moroccan Jews in Israel were changing their names. And in place of being named Azoulay like myself, changing for being Bronstein or Bronfman, because it could make the life easier, better, and probably for them and their children. And in place of being born in Essaouira like myself, they prefer to change the papers and mentioning born in Marseille or in London or in Madrid. Could you imagine how painful it have been? I mean, it is for someone to cut the link with what he is, in fact, what was his family, what was his personal history. We cannot imagine something more painful than that and more destructive than that. So I decided at that time, I created a group in Paris with some Moroccan friends and Sephardic friends. We named it Identity and Dialogue. It was in 1973. The first chapter, Identity, was to retake over of our own, history and proudness of, like everyone, of our own roots, and not remaining in this alienation and this very, very painful situation we were confronted to. And it was identity, and we won. Now not only it's over for many Moroccan Jews to change, and in the country are very proud. We helped with my friends to make them proud of their roots, of their history, of their identity, of everything related to their own experience. And the second chapter was dialogue. If you allow me just for 3 seconds.
Sure.
Identity, I explained. Dialogue was because we decided by ourselves to identify our history to the Arab world, to Morocco. We said we cannot ignore what is going on for the Palestinians. We have to do all our best, because of our special history and special understanding of our own roots. We have to try to fill the gap and to help the Israelis to understand the Arab world, the Palestinian cause, and to help the Palestinian and the Arabs to understand also the complexity of the Israeli history and the Jewish sensitivities.
We have a couple of questions in our remaining time from the audience. Danny, do you want to pick a couple and put them before Andre?
Sure. So thank you very much, Mr. Azoulay. This has been fantastic. I want to present a question from Ken in the chat. He says that in the years around 1950, 355 million Jews or so left North Africa for immigration to Israel. And we learn about the effect on Israel and on the immigration of those families there. But how did that affect, in the sense that all of these Jews were leaving Morocco, what was the effect internally in Morocco? And could you speak to that, having lived there too and been so involved with the community, what were the impacts internally?
Well, in fact, what was the situation? The situation the Moroccan Jews were confronted in Israel at that time was not really known in Morocco, and it is still not well known. There is no literature. There are some, books in Hebrew, some very few books in French or in English, but it is not really spread. So we are trying to encourage Moroccan scholars to work on it, and you will listen in 2 days from now, I think, to Mehdi and to Laziza from Mimuna, which I'm so proud of them, and so proud and so happy because they do exist, and they are also telling this. They are spreading this information and this more more understanding in the Moroccan society of all the chapters of the Moroccan Jewish history book. But in fact, if you ask Moroccan non-Jewish Moroccan, they don't know, I mean, the stigmatization, or they know very little about the stigmatization and the split and the difficulties the Moroccan Jews were confronted to in Israel. I mean, it was not for all. It was not, I mean, a kind of systematic discriminatory or I mean, stigmatization for everyone. But it happens. I mean, but who knows about the Black Panthers, the Moroccan Jewish Black Panthers at that time? Who knows about all these Wadi Salib groups who were fighting? I mean, many of them were in prison, many of them were hurt, maybe some pay with their lives, this situation at that time, but it is not really known. But what I am trying to, I mean, when I address some Moroccan audiences or other audiences in the Arab world, and speaking about the situation at that time, I'm trained to tell the truth and to tell my audiences what happens. It's not easy because it could be also something which could hurt Israel and the perception of Israel, because I mean, the largest number of Moroccans don't know this period really, because it was not, I mean, educated. I mean, there is nothing about it in the schools, in the school books, and the programs. Maybe it will happen. And if I may say at this point that we have created in Essaouira, and it was inaugurated by His Majesty the King last January, what we named as a Beit Dakira, which means the memory house, memory and history house. And it is explained, it will be explained in it, because we created inside this memory house the first international study center to revisit relation between Jews and Muslims in Morocco, and between Islam and Judaism more largely. So we will have a place, an address, a building, teachers and scholars and academics faculties who will work on it. And I'm sure that if one day we have the pleasure to receive you in Essaouira, you will see people working in it, and you will see a program. I mean, we are on the starting block now, and we were delayed because of the pandemic, but I'm very confident that it will be a place which will help to fill the gap of ignorance on that place, on that item.
Great.
So we're reaching to 2 o'clock, and we in fairness to Mr. Azoulay, don't want to go beyond it. But what I want to urge all of you before I conclude our program today is to go to our resource page on kivunimonline.org, where you will find many material, both texts, videos, and there will be other things going up that really will amplify what we've heard in the last hour and the questions that may get opened up in your minds. And then I hope you'll join us on Thursday to hear the co-founders of Association Mimuna, El Mehdi Boudra and Laziza Dalil, speak about their work, which is really quite extraordinary. Working in Morocco, in a Muslim country with a very now tiny Jewish population, to teach the next generation about the heritage of Moroccan Jewry. It would be as if in the United States we had an entire movement, which we do not have, to teach our citizens about the story of the Native Americans. We clearly now realize we don't even have a system to teach about our African American co-citizens, let alone our Aboriginal original citizens. So it's Thursday, I think you will really find to be amazingly fascinating. And secondly, I want to let all of you know that next June, soon to be announced with its new dates, the first Limud Morocco will take place in Essaouira, with the deep support and help of both Mr. Azoulay and the local authorities, and you're all invited. And it will be an opportunity to really spend not an hour, but days on learning this quite remarkable story in much more detail, and in music and in art, and as well as in history and diplomacy, and really build a consciousness that can be transferred to others. Andre, I want to thank you very much for taking.
Thank you so much, Peter, and we are waiting for you.
Well, I'm anxiously waiting to get on that plane for sure. But really, thank you so much for taking your very busy time to spend with us. We really appreciate it. And for all of you who have joined us today, please continue to be with us through the rest of this series, and certainly this week. And we thank you, because it's important that we expand our consciousness. And this is just the opening of a door to something which has a much bigger future. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Andre.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.